message today will be in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse. We're going to look at the whole of the book of Ruth, but we'll look starting off at Ruth chapter 1 and verse 3 through 5. Ruth, this is the book after Judges and before Samuel. Tiny book with only 4 chapters. We're going to look at the whole thing today. Ruth chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So we see that this happened. Of course, the title of today's message, we're going to look at the faith of Ruth. So Ruth is a very important person in the Bible, especially looking at her faith. It is something that for us we can come to know very preciously in our lives. To know what kind of person Ruth was, what kind of person her faith, what kind of faith she had, and what we can as well to learn about her faith. Because the message of Ruth is really about the history of God, that we shouldn't forget that the same thing that happened to Ruth, which is redemption, right, happens to us as well too. Of course, through His Son Jesus Christ. So. Let's look at the background first. So what we just read about the background is that we read the story of an Israelite from Bethlehem who actually moved to Moab, which is a Gentile country. It's not Israel, but it's a different nation. And so they went from Bethlehem in Israel over to Moab, and this is a Gentile nation. Now, this person that went over there got married to Naomi, a person, she went together with Naomi, but that person died. But Naomi had 2 sons, and those 2 sons married people from that Moab Gentile country, right? So this person, plus his wife Naomi from Israel, went over to Moab, but the husband died, leaving Naomi. And Naomi had 2 sons, and those 2 sons married to people, to Moab Gentile women from that place, but also those 2 sons died. And so basically what we're left with is 3 widows, right? So we're left with 3 widows. And so if you look at that era, the 3 widows in general were very powerless, right? We're talking about the culture of that era, how it was back then, not now. But back then, they had no status. Usually, if you had any kind of place in society, it was because of either your husband, or if you're a widow, it was because of your sons, right? But for Naomi, her 2 sons died, and these 2 also had no children as well, too, right? And we're going to read about that. So, Naomi, what happens is that she is set out to go back to Israel, right? She says, let's all go back to Israel. But then later on, she changes her mind and says, you know what, you 2, right, the 2 younger widows, you should go back home and go find a husband, right? But when she says that, what happens? So let's look from verse 8 through 13. So Ruth chapter 1, verse 8 through 13. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them and wept out loud and said to her, we will go back to you, to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husband? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to a son, Would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against you. And so we see here that they were very, very close. Naomi, she says, go, right? But then they're saying, no, we want to stay. We cannot be away from you. But Naomi, she gives all these reasons. Like she says, like, am I going to have another son that, you're going to be able to marry to these two, daughter-in-laws? And even if she were to have them, they would have to grow up, right? And so that would take a very long time. And so she gives all those reasons. And so Naomi's really pushing on them that, you got to go home and you got to go find yourself a husband, right? Like that, instead of sticking around me, right? She's basically telling that. So let's continue on to Ruth chapter 1, verse 14 and 19, and let's see what happens. At this, they wept again that Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived at Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? So the two women, the two daughter-in-laws, so one's named Orpah and the other's Ruth, right? And so Orpah, she just goes, right? So, she kind of clung on to Naomi at first, but, after all the reasoning came out, it was very reasonable. Like, am I going to have a son? And then, am I even going to get married and have a son? Even if that son is, it has to grow up before they get married. It's way too long. And so Orpah goes, right? But Ruth, we really read the words of Ruth here, and she clings on very, very tightly to Naomi, no matter what reason, no matter what customs, what's normal, right? That is happening all around. Like, Orpah does what's normal, right? What's typical. But Naomi, she clings on, right? She clings on and won't leave Naomi and goes with her to Israel. She says, really, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. And really, nothing, if anything but death separates us, really, she says it in this way. So, when it comes to Orpah and Ruth, we don't want to discount Orpah. She does have human love for Naomi, right? Orpah and Ruth both have human love for Naomi. However, what we really see about what we really do see about Ruth here towards Naomi is that she really has deep love for Naomi, and she also has her own faith in God, right? And so she really believes in, this was probably, they were so close like this, probably Naomi was the one who taught Ruth and Orpah about the God of Israel, right? They're in Moab, Gentile country, but it's clear that in their day-to-day lives here, Naomi did teach Ruth about the God of Israel, right? The God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so here we see that Ruth has her own faith in God. And so that's very important, right? This is about the faith of Ruth, and we see that although both Ruth and Orpah both have love, these were both women of love. And so we can be like that too. We also are people that have love. We have human love. We have human connections. Even when we are at church, we have human connections and we love one another. We have love for our brothers and sisters. And that's good. That's very, very important. But at the same time, right, we see that Ruth has her own personal faith in the God that she was taught by Naomi, faith in God. Right? Your God will be my God, and your people will be my people. She really, really believes in God, has faith in God, and in God's people, the nation of Israel, the church, right? In other words, if we're speaking about it in our day, in our age. And so, what does this deep faith, so that's the core, that's the starting point, and that's the core that she has. And so we see that Naomi's love is based on that faith. Well, Orpah, she has love, but perhaps it's not based on this faith. Maybe she heard about it, but all the things of the world and the customs of the world, she just follows what is reasonable. But for Ruth, she has love no matter what, and so that faith gives her this deep love that doesn't end, and at the same time, what we can encompass, I think the word that really encompasses what Ruth has is loyalty. Right? So she has deep loyalty. She has deep loyalty to Naomi, but remember, this is not just human loyalty, not just like loyalty because we're loyal to Naomi, right, to another person, but at the same time, her faith demonstrates this loyalty to God, right, in particular, right? The God of Israel, her God, your God will be my God. So we see that. And so when we look at the faith of Ruth and we apply it to us, we have to see it, right, very well, that we also are like Ruth. We're also like Orpah, we're also like Ruth. We are Gentiles, right? We're Gentiles. We're Gentiles because we really aren't God's people. We're people of the world, right? That is how we are. We are people of the world, and we really don't deserve to be with God, be with His people, be with His nation. We are separated because of our sin, right? We are in the world, and we are in sin, and we are separated with God. And so this could be how we feel. But here's the thing, we may feel like that. I often feel like that. I grew up from a non-Christian background. Sometimes, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could be, sometimes we say Gentile is because you come from a non-Christian family. Sometimes we speak like that. But in actuality, Gentile is anyone that feels a little bit separate. Maybe I'm not part of this group, right? Maybe there is this group, there is this fellowship of brothers and sisters, this church, right? And it feels like everyone else is part of this group, but I'm not sure if I'm part of the group yet, right? That's how Ruth was, right? At first, it's your people, right? So she's sort of getting introduced. She really desires and wants, but a little bit separated from that in that way. And so, but what we do see about Ruth is that she does want her God to be my God, your people to be my people. So she has that desire. And so do we have that as well when it comes to God? Do we have that kind of faith? That faith, which is that open heart and the desire, right? To be a part. Right? I want to be a part. I want to be a part of what God is doing, be a part of His people, and really go forward in that way. We see that Ruth definitely has that kind of heart in her, that kind of faith is inside of her heart. And so, let's continue on the story, and let's see what happens. So let's look at Ruth Chapter 2, and then verse 1. Ruth Chapter 2, and then verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As soon as it turned out, she found herself working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Right? So here, what happens is that now Ruth has followed Naomi to Israel. Ruth is now in Israel, and so she's got to make a living. She doesn't have any status, doesn't have any place. Remember, no husband, no son, right? So she doesn't have any status, doesn't have any place, and so she's got to work on her own. And so what she decides to do is that it was a very kind society back then. So if people were working in the fields, then there were some leftover grain from the field, right? And this is what we call gleaning, right? So they gleaned from the field. So they worked in the fields, but maybe some would go by the wayside, and so Ruth would follow the other workers to glean from fields, right? And this field happens to be the field of Boaz. And so who is Boaz? Boaz is a relative of Elimelech. So this is Naomi's husband's relative, right? So her husband died, but that husband who passed away, this is a relative of that husband, right? And so it's from, it's still family, right? It's an in-law family in that way. Right? And so she goes into the field with Boaz. And let's continue on. Ruth Chapter 2, verse 8 through 13. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." And at this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you have left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort, and I have spoken kindly to your servants, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." So, it talks about the conversation Boaz has with Ruth, right? So Boaz, we see, welcomes Ruth very warmly into the fields and offers her protection, right? She says, "Yeah, go ahead, glean in the fields and drink from the water. I've told the men, not to do anything, nefarious or anything like that, right?" And so she has the protection of Boaz, right? And so, Ruth is wondering, why? Why are you so kind to me? Ruth is wondering, why is it that you are so kind to me in this way? And Boaz says, he knows, he has heard, right? He has heard about how loyal, how faithful and loyal Ruth was, right? So she had this kind of relationship with Naomi. If we really look, we can come up with a lot of words. There is something, there is some very deep relationship, and it's more than just a human relationship. We know it's a human relationship based on her faith in God, based on the two together, their shared faith in God, right? And so it's not just a human relationship. If it's just a human relationship, just because we like one another and we're friends and we're like that, then events that can happen. Life comes, life hits us all. And we go, and many things can happen, and we see that friendships and human relationships based on that can easily break, right? But there's something different, really. We can feel it as we're reading this. It's hard to put into words, but I'll give it a shot. But we know it's something spiritual, but we'll put a shot. It's that they both have faith in God together, and so when you look, they have this deep respect. Right? They have this deep respect in their love. Their friendship is something really, really unbreakable. Not unbreakable because humans can break their friendship relationship, but unbreakable because their friendship and fellowship is in God. They also have just this deep humility and understanding with one another. That is the loyalty, right? I'm using different words. It's like sometimes, these human words that we have, language, you can't really explain it, but we know it's there, right? As we read it, we know there's something between Naomi, the relationship that these two women have that is based on a faithful relationship that each of them has with God, individually and with each other. And so when we see that, this feeling, right, this feeling of that deep relationship that they have with God and with others, Boaz feels the same. Right? Boaz has heard of this and he understands it. Right? He understands it. And so he tries to describe this too, right? And so he says various things. He gives examples about, this is how, he says things like you left your father and your homeland. So he's giving examples to really, really speak about some deep spirituality in their love and their relationship and their faith with God and with others. And may the Lord richly bless you. And so, he doesn't say it directly, right? He doesn't say it directly, but as you really hear what Boaz knows about, the events and all that happens, you can feel it. right? You can feel the spirituality behind this that is in there. And then so for him, he feels like God is calling him to reward that, right? I mean, it's not just Boaz like humanly rewarding that, but we must know that Boaz is also a person of faith, right? Boaz is a really, really great person of faith, in fact. He's a great person of faith with the Holy Spirit really guiding him in this direction to really reward that. That Ruth, who was very, very loyal to Naomi, to her faith in God, that he wants to bless that, right? He wants to bless that. That, that's actually really what happens when you really live life. You will come to find this. Loyalty, this kind of faith and friendship and respect and love and humility, it engenders the same as well too, right? And so if we are like that in our relationship with God, in our relationship with others, we're going to receive the same, right? Others are going to really have that kind of respect and humility and loyalty and love, and that's going to be with us too, right? And that's where, this is where real true relationship among brothers and sisters in our church happens. It happens because of our shared faith in God in this way. And more importantly than how we are with one another, I mean, that's important, how we are with one another, but what's even more important than that is our loyal, holy fear, respectful, humble, faithful relationship with God. God never disappoints. He will definitely bless that. And he definitely blesses that through Boaz, right? Boaz is really called in order to bless that faith. So we see this about Ruth, right? So let's continue on. Let's look at Ruth Chapter 2 and in verse 20. So Ruth Chapter 2 and in verse 20. It says, "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsmen redeemers." Okay? And so she is this kind of person. And so basically Naomi, she hears about the fact that Ruth is gleaning in the field of Boaz, and she also hears probably about the conversation that Ruth has with Boaz, and then Naomi's very happy to hear all this, right? She says to Ruth, "Hey, Ruth, that person, Boaz, is actually one of our relatives, one of our in-law relatives, and he is a kinsman redeemer," right? He's a kinsman redeemer. So kinsman, it's like someone, kinsman, it's like someone from your clan, someone from your extended clan, extended family, extended tribe, right? And he is your kinsman redeemer. So we'll study that word a bit as we go on forward. And so we'll put a finger on that, and then later on we're going to kind of see what that means. So let's continue on. Ruth Chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Ruth Chapter 3, and then verse 1 through 6. "One day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say,' Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do." So we see that. So Naomi tells Ruth to do all these things. It's some kind of custom and tradition, back then, signifying, about this kinsman redeemer. So actually think about it. Ruth is coming from, she has faith. We already know she already has faith. But she comes from the Gentile country, the Moab country. So she doesn't understand whatever it is that the customs were at the time. And so for her, she needs help. And so that's why she needs Naomi. So this is what a spiritual mother, right? This is what a mother, Naomi is really like a mother to Ruth. This is what a spiritual mother helps us to do in our life of faith. We are foreigners to God, right? We are foreigners to God. And so there is something where we need to be guided, right? We need to be guided. We are foreigners to God. We are just young and we're going up in faith and we don't quite know how it is we can come closer to God in faith. faith. And so what we need is we need help, right? We need help of people who are more senior, who are older along in faith than us, to help guide us, right? To help guide us to the way, right? To help guide us in the path of God. And so we have to be like Ruth, who, what it records is that she obeys Naomi precisely, right? Even when she doesn't fully know God, she knows, oh, I really trust in Naomi, I really have faith in God, and I'm going to obey precisely. And so she has this kind of faith. And so we see this is another aspect about Ruth's faith. She has faith and obedience in God and in who God is sending to her, a person like Naomi, to teach her, right? And so she has this kind of faith in her. Ruth does. Let's continue on. Let's look at Ruth Chapter 3, and then verse 10 to 12. Ruth Chapter 3, verse 10 to 12. So this is about Boaz. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run away after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Right? So, because of this tradition and these customs, here, Boaz, he is clear that he knows Ruth's intentions, like what Ruth hopes for, right? That he hopes that she can be the kinsman redeemer, right? So she can marry, basically, marry Ruth, right? This widow who does not have a husband or son, to have some, in that day and age, you needed a husband or a son in order to have status inside of society. And so to be this kinsman redeemer, to be the person who will marry her and give her the status. So Boaz knows this intention, and she also testifies about Ruth. She says that Ruth, she has not gone off and run after younger men, so it's possible that Boaz is older. He's quite wealthy. He has a lot of fields. It's possible that he's a little bit older, and then also that she is testified as a person of very noble character. Right? So this is another aspect about the fruits that she's showing in faith. There is her loyalty, her humbleness, her respectfulness and honorability that she has, and she is of noble character as well too. We see the kind of faith, the kind of heart that she has. And so Boaz knows the intention now. So in the law, we see, in fact, it wasn't just custom and tradition. Most of this here is just custom and tradition. But in fact, there is, even in the law recorded in the Bible, such thing as a way to redeem people, right? So in the law, there was a way to redeem people. So let's look at Leviticus chapter 25. It's not exactly the situation from Ruth and Naomi. Here, they're just following some custom that was in that day and age. But there was in the law a way to redeem people. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 47 through 49. Verse 47 through 49. If an alien or a temporary resident among you becomes rich, right? So this is like a Gentile, one of your countrymen becomes poor, right, and sells himself to the alien living among you, or to a member of the alien's clan, right, foreigner, he retains the right of redemption after he has sold himself. One of his relatives may redeem him. An uncle or a cousin or any blood relative in his clan may redeem him, or if he prospers, he may redeem himself. Right? So basically, let's say a person, what it's trying to say is, let's say a person, he comes on hard times and he becomes poor. And then, so back then, this person would sell themselves to maybe someone else, a foreigner inside of the world, right? And so that relates to us. There are those among us that we really, really should follow God. We are all God's children, but we have sold ourselves to the world, right? Become a servant to the world. We sell ourselves to the world. But even if we have sold ourselves to the world and sin and in its depravity, there should be a way that I can be redeemed back from the world, be redeemed back from that sinful nature. And so in the law it says a relative can redeem that person, can bring that person back to Israel. So they were an Israelite, but they sold themselves to the world, but they can be redeemed by a relative back into the Israelite nation. We see that, that same thing. I mean, that it's sort of a technical, lawful thing back then, but definitely relates to us all when it comes to the way of sin in the world and really coming back to God. It's really the same message. And so, there, the Bible's writing about that. There was also clearly some kind of Jewish tradition that the widows are also, for widows that Naomi is teaching Ruth. And so now Boaz, he knows the intention, and he feels blessed about this, right? But he says, the problem is though, Ruth, that there is actually a closer relative than me. So Boaz is a relative, right? But it can't just be any relative. There's like an order for the relatives, right? So there's a closer relative, kinsman, right? Kinsman that can redeem Naomi as his wife. And so let's look at that. Let's look at Ruth chapter 4 and in verse 1 through 12. Ruth chapter 4, verse 1 through 12. It says, Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, Come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, Sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring that matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of those you seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, On the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabites, you acquire the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. And so the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, Buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, Mahlon's wife, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property so that his name will not disappear among his family or from the town records. Today you are witness. And the elders and all those at the gate said, We are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming to your home like Rachel and Leah together and build up the house of Israel. May you stand in Epaphra and be famous in Bethlehem. Though the offspring of the Lord gives you by this the young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who tomorrow bore to Judah. So, what happens? So, they go through this custom and this tradition. Now, the bottom line is that one closer relative thinks it's, the obligation is too much, right, to bring on Ruth. He doesn't want to take care of Ruth. It's too much, right? It's too much to. He likes the property, right? And but not Ruth, right? Not Ruth. And so instead, what Boaz does is he redeems Ruth himself. He gets all the property, including at the time women were considered property at the time, which is very sad. But anyways, that's how it was. And anyways, he brings on Ruth as his wife at that time too. And so as we look at the story now. Kinsman redeemer, all of this, why is this important, and how does it relate to us? So the first thing we need to understand is that Ruth is a Gentile woman, right? So she is a person who came from a pagan upbringing. She had no chance really to meet God. And circumstances for her were very, very unfavorable all along the way, really, for her to actually be a Gentile that can become a part of God's people. The circumstances were unfavorable for her all the way along, right? It's like difficult. It's difficult to meet all the circumstances of the law. I mean, it's difficult to even meet the circumstances of this kinsman redeemer, her situation as a widow most of the time. Vast majority of the cases here, women cannot get married again. This would be not possible. people. And so when it came to tradition, when it came to ritual, when it came to the law, right, there were many, many aspects that were unfavorable for her. When it comes to us as well, too, it could be like that. For us to be God's people, to really follow in God, follow His will, follow Him in our life, when it comes to us and our human circumstances and, can we really do it, things are unfavorable, right? We have a lot of trouble fitting that, right? Yet, at the same time, Ruth really desired it with faith and love, and loyalty and obedience, and all that we see inside of the faith of Ruth. And then somehow, by faith, God made all the circumstances happen, right? It's not even her own in-law. It's like an in-law of an in-law, right? And so she's an in-law of Naomi and an in-law of that. I suppose, actually, technically speaking, it is just one level of in-law. But you can almost call it an in-law of an in-law. It's like, it's a few places removed, basically. And even in this case, someone really didn't want her. Someone could have brought on Ruth, but he didn't want to go through the obligation, right? He didn't want to meet the circumstances and then meet the obligation. But Boaz, who had a heart of faith and love, embraced her, right? And followed really God's will in this way. So this really teaches us about the faith of Ruth. For the one that truly, truly desires God, that really wants to be a part of God's history, maybe we don't meet the perfect circumstances. All of us are Gentiles, far away from God and sinners, right? But if we do have that desire, if we do have an open heart of faith, even if we don't perfectly meet the circumstances, if we do have that kind of faith, God will help us. Right? God will help us meet the circumstances, right? For all these things to line up for Ruth was unfathomable, really, at the time, but it just so happened, right? The Holy Spirit guided, and it just so happened that God met all the circumstances for her to be redeemed. We need to remember that that is the same for us. We are not perfect, right? We will not be able to meet all the circumstances by the law to be righteous and to follow God. But what the beautiful thing about the gospel and the faith that we have is that instead God met all the circumstances for us through Jesus Christ who took up the cross for us and loved us. So we must be like Ruth to open up our hearts to God, and God will do everything. Right? God is the one that will do all things in our life. We are Ruth, not powerful, but God still will bless us and take care of us. And how will He bless us? Let's continue on and read the really final part here. So Ruth chapter 4, from verse 13 through 22. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who is this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better than you, than 7 sons, who has given him birth." And Naomi took the child and laid her in her lap and cared for him. The woman living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadab, Aminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. So Ruth basically has her son, Obed, and it was a great blessing even to the grandmother, Naomi, right? Naomi is the grandmother, but people in the town are saying, oh, that is Naomi's son. She's actually the grandmother, technically speaking, but regarding as her own. And so not only is Ruth redeemed, Ruth is redeemed by her kinsman redeemer, Boaz, but she's also redeemed, of course, because now she has a husband, and now she has a son as well too. So she is redeemed back into society by Obed too, her son. But it's not only Ruth, it's also Naomi too. And Naomi also, through Obed, now has a connection, right? Now has a connection, and she is redeemed back in this way. And so what a blessing that comes to Ruth, what a blessing that comes to Naomi in this way. It is that God teaches us as well too that even despite the perfect circumstances or unlikeliness of being a Gentile even, God will welcome anybody at all into his grace. It doesn't matter what kind of background that we have, right? Both Ruth and Naomi were widows, and things took a bad turn, right? Things took a bad turn for them in their lives. Their husbands died. For Naomi, both her sons died, but they kept faith. And by faith, God redeemed them and guided them in their life. And this shows us that everything is under God's sovereignty. This shows that God can change our life no matter what. In our life, things can turn, right? Life takes all kinds of different directions, right? Things happen to us. Many things happen to us. Many things happen to us that take unfavorable circumstances, unfavorable turns. Right? It can happen in our school. It can happen in our work. It can happen in finances. It can happen in family. It can happen in life, just in general. In all kinds of aspects, life takes all kinds of different unfavorable circumstances in our life. But what is the faith, the Christian faith that we have in our Lord Jesus Christ? It is faith in the living Lord and his living resurrection, right? That he is the way, the truth, and the life. Right? And it is the resurrection of the Lord Jesus that overcomes all. His victory tells us that no matter what unfavorable turn, no matter what sin and power of the world and bad turn our life can take, God can turn it around immediately and give us the resurrection. He turns it all around, and when you look back, you realize, oh, well, even that bad turn, it was all under God's protection from the beginning. It was all under his love and his plan and his amazing sovereignty. So for us, all we have really is our faith, just like the faith of Ruth, to really have this deep heart of love for God and the Holy Spirit that's guiding in our life, and know that God will bless us greatly. One final verse I want to look at, Hebrews chapter 11, and in verse 6. You should remember this verse in the life of faith. Hebrews chapter 11, and in verse 6. Now, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So, having faith, and he rewards us, right? Those who seek him. Ruth had this kind of faith. It was shown in her compassion, her love, her loyalty, her diligence, right? The nobleness of her life, the honor and respect she gave to Naomi, how her faith in God, it was all shown through her whole life in this way. She was a Gentile that truly had faith, desiring God, and God redeemed her back into the fold of God's nation. But not only that, she blessed her with Obed. She blessed her immensely in her life. In fact, it's a blessing beyond blessings. It's not that she just redeemed her, but God gave her a blessing beyond what you can even imagine. Obed became the grandfather of King David, right? So the grandfather of King David, and because of that too, because of her faith, Matthew records Ruth in the genealogy. This is in Matthew chapter 1 and in verse 5. Ruth is in the New Testament. Right? Matthew chapter 1 and in verse 5 it says, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of King David. Right? So it's all recorded here. So really, what a great person that Ruth was, and how much God, this is beyond Ruth's life, right? It's the fact that it's King David and the fact that Matthew recorded her in the genealogy. These are blessings that God gave Ruth even beyond her life. That is the eternal blessing that God gives. When God blesses us, He will redeem us, and He will bless us and give us the living resurrection in our life, but He will also give us blessings we cannot even imagine, we cannot even fathom, we cannot even see. Maybe blessings we can't even see in our lifetime even. He will give us blessings in that way. That is unimaginably how God helps us bear fruit 30, 60, 100 times beyond what we can know. And so for us, it's really just faith. This is the faith of Ruth, her loyalty, her compassion, her love, I wish that we could have the faith of Ruth. She was distinguished in this way by her love, and God is faithful. God is faithful and blessed her immensely. He never leaves us. He is the one that always blesses us immensely in our faith. I pray that we can really know this Father, today we learned about the faith of Ruth. We learned about the deep heart of faith and love and compassion and loyalty and holy fear and respect and just friendship and so many aspects about Ruth's faith that really endured throughout history, Lord, and that how you were faithful, Lord. You certainly blessed her. You redeemed her. You guided her unfavorable circumstances. You turned it around all at once and you redeemed her. Not only did you redeem her, but you gave her the blessing of the resurrection in her life and beyond her life. And we know that, Lord, that is the blessing that we receive, Lord. So may we walk in faith, trusting in you, Lord, that you have the great grace to be able to turn our lives around. You have the great grace in order to really redeem us no matter what unfavorable circumstances, no matter how our past life has been, no matter how it's been, you can turn it around. And not only that, Lord, you can bless us immensely beyond what we can imagine. We thank you, Lord, so much for your loving grace in our life. We thank you, and in Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.